Thank you very much to the Climate Action Network for putting on this event and for inviting me to say a few words. And clearly it couldn't be more timely, both because of the Paris climate talks, but also because just last week, as we heard, the World Meteorological Organization warned that global average temperatures are set to rise by 1 degree C above pre-industrial levels for the very first time. So that's just about to happen any second. And as the WMO's Secretary General Michel Jarraud put it, we're moving into uncharted territory at a frightening speed. The laws of physics are non-negotiable. Given that it is so patently obvious that we need to act, what is stopping us from doing that? Because it seems to me that if we could address that, then we might be able to unjam the climate crisis that we face. It's not that we don't know what we need to do. It's not that we don't have the money. It's not that we don't have the technology. It's not that we don't have the science. We don't have the political will. And we need to explore why that is and what we could do more about it. The fact that we're on a collision course with something so horrendous that could put at risk all of the wonderful species that we share this wonderful world with, in a sense, it's not surprising that we just choose not to think about it. And if we do that, those of us who are kind of motivated about this action, then how much more do people out there do it? If, as they hear from Duncan, that there's lots of fear out there, that it's a scary thing, then why wouldn't you just try and go on as usual and not think too much about it?
You can remind people of how dangerous climate change is, of the likely impacts of climate change on the world, on the country. But the message of fear doesn't usually work, or it drives people into voting Conservative or UKIP, the two parties that thrive on a fearful message. Our message has to be one of hope and opportunity.
At this point, I want to pay tribute to all of the NGOs who put together that campaign called For the Love Of. It was a very positive campaign. It recognised that we're not going to get behaviour change by terrifying people, by painting pictures of a future based on us shivering around a candle in a cave. That's not a very compelling vision, and it won't get people to change their behaviour. The whole point of For the Love Of campaign was actually celebrating what we love and saying why we want to protect it. Because it is true that we will not protect what we do not love. Some of you may remember another film, the film The Age of Stupid, that was released about 5 years ago. It's based on the premise that some kind of climate catastrophe has happened in the year 2050. There is a sole survivor of this climate catastrophe, played by the wonderful actor Pete Postlethwaite. And the film is based on this conceit that there he is in 2050, looking back at real weather reels from now. I mean, genuinely real ones. The film gathered them together of things like the typhoons in the Philippines, the heat waves in Australia, the freezing temperatures in the US. And the film has Pete Postlethwaite looking at all of this footage and saying in words that still make the hairs go up at the back of my neck when I say them, why is it, knowing what we knew then, we didn't act when we still had time? And that to me just about is the most important question we could possibly be asking. And it quite literally haunts me. Why is it that we seem to be content to be the only species that will go down in history as a species that spent its time monitoring its own extinction rather than taking active steps to avoid it? And I think one of those is certainly the power and the vested interests of the fossil fuel companies, who are increasingly not simply lobbying government, but being given senior roles within it. I made a Freedom of Information request a few years back, which revealed that there are no fewer than 23 private sector employees working at our Department of Environment and Climate Change, and they are coming from companies like Shell, RWE, Centrica and Rolls-Royce. And believe me, they're not there out of the kindness of their hearts trying to design a nice sustainable energy policy. They are there to ensure that the policies that come out are ones that suit their business models. And one of the most high-profile greenwash examples in recent times, COP21 itself, is being sponsored by some of France's dirtiest corporations, companies like Air France, the nuclear and coal giant EDF, the coal financing bank BNP Paribas. So while some businesses are certainly in the vanguard of promoting sustainable practice, and I would certainly say that some businesses are way ahead of the politicians on this, all too many others have enormous vested interests in the status quo and in an economic system that depends on perpetuating ever-increasing growth of deeply damaging production and consumption patterns. And not only are they generating this kind of growth, they are also persuading or trying to persuade us to be involved in that, to drive that growth as well. And so we see ourselves changed in the way in which we're described, away from being citizens. We're only defined in terms of our role as consumers. And to make sure we play the game, we are bombarded by over 3,000 advertisements every day, all of them persuading us, in the wonderful words of Professor Tim Jackson, to spend money we don't have on things we don't need, to make impressions that don't last on people we don't care about. And in his new book, Post-Capitalism, Paul Mason points out that it's become common to laugh at the absurdities of the climate change deniers, but he points out actually there is a rationality to their response, because they know that climate science destroys their authority, their power, and their economic world. And in a way, they've grasped that if climate change is real, then capitalism as we know it is finished. So the real absurdists are not, in a sense, the climate change deniers, but the politicians and economists who believe that the existing market mechanisms can stop climate change, that the market must set the limits of climate action, and that the market can be structured to deliver the biggest re-engineering project humanity has ever tried. So one of the biggest blocks to getting off this collision course we're on with climate catastrophe is the need to radically alter our economic system. But the good news is that some of this is perhaps beginning to dawn on some people in some high places, and perhaps nowhere more so than the Governor of the Bank of England. Because just a few weeks ago, Mark Carney did warn businesses that vast reserves of oil and coal and gas are going to be literally unburnable, his words, causing potentially huge losses for investors, because if climate policies come into place, then we know that 80% of known fossil fuel reserves simply can't be burnt. They simply can't be burnt safely without triggering climate catastrophe. And when you've got the Governor of the Bank of England saying that, I think that's quite helpful. And if you look at the fact of where investment is already going, the early adopters in the investment community are already beginning to move a substantial amount of their finances away from fossil fuels. They're divesting from fossil fuels to the tune of $2.6 trillion so far. The world's largest institutional investors, including the Norwegian sovereign wealth and Rockefeller brothers, have all expressed their concern about the risks that their investments in fossil fuels have, and they are beginning to move those investments elsewhere. So that challenge of redirecting finance away from fossil fuels and into low carbon energy is something we need to be seeing right from business through to local communities, but crucially as well through government policy. And as Duncan eloquently pointed out, we are seeing absolutely the opposite from this government. I won't go through the list again, but as he was saying, slashing solar support, giving money to fossil fuels, locking us into yet more nuclear power, and I would add as well, not paying any acknowledgement at all to the enormous role that agriculture plays in driving climate change, and in particular from the meat-based agriculture that very rarely gets discussed by government at all. The green economy is far more labour intensive and creates far more jobs than the fossil fuel economy that it replaces, and so that's the good news. And I think it allows us to constantly challenge the Chancellor when he gives the impression that moving towards a sustainable economy is somehow some kind of luxury that we can't afford at a time of economic difficulty. To the contrary, it is precisely by investing in that sustainable economy and the jobs in that economy, insulating every single home in Britain, for example, that is the way in which we get away from the economic crisis that we face, rather than that being a diversion from it. And if people say, well, where are we going to find the money to, let's say, properly insulate every home in Britain, there are plenty of places we could find that money. In terms of the upfront money, we could be looking at the money that is currently locked up in Trident. We could be looking at green quantitative easing, which is something the Green Party was talking long about far before Jeremy Corbyn caught up with People's quantitative easing, but that's fine, we welcome him to the same idea. But crucially, if we were to properly insulate every home, Cambridge Economics has done the figures on it and shown that for every £1 that you invest in doing that, the Treasury gets back £1.27 because of the extra tax take from the jobs created. So there is really no excuse not to be going down this road. Maybe in my last 10 seconds I could just say that if we're serious about national and global security as we think about those issues right now, then I think there are very, very good reasons to be tackling the climate change crisis because of the way in which it drives social unrest, causing droughts and lots of the issues that we've seen actually in some of the groundwork that led to where we're now in Syria was because of a huge drought in Syria, arguably caused by climate change. So the question is not should we move and deal with climate change. The question is, why aren't we galvanising the political will to do it? Thank you so much.